This video is spoiler heavy. I'm going to go over the entire game and its endings. If you don't want spoilers, I'll leave some links of other reviews in the description down below. Thank you. Fresh off the coattails of their smash franchise and The Witcher's second release, CD Projekt Red released a teaser trailer for a new title, a game called Cyberpunk 2077, depicting a woman with cybernetic enhancements being shot at. It gained the attention of many fans and journalists, seeing as it was the complete opposite of CD Projekt Red's most well-known franchise. Rather than the same medieval RPG, an unknown, futuristic title. And after a long silence from the developers, the sequel, The Witcher 3, came out. And yet, no word on the mysterious trailer they'd put out years ago. After a long pause of almost 7 years, CD Projekt Red finally spoke out about their next title, Cyberpunk 2077. And thus, the hype train began. From trailers, interviews, and Keanu Reeves calling people breathtaking,
"You're breathtaking!"
fans were enthralled, with the Witcher franchise being well known, and a futuristic take from the same developers would be a sight keen to the public, especially with support of a big personality like Keanu Reeves. The scale of question, environments, story, combat all came into perspective as they showed off the game for the first time, and it looked great. But upon full release, to say the game was half-baked would be an understatement, being completely unplayable on launch for anyone on console, or anyone without a top-end PC. Even those with top-end PCs encountered constant game-breaking bugs and insanely low frame rates, rendering what could have been a great prospect into something completely unplayable on launch. Immediately, the scathing reviews came out in mass, throwing CD Projekt Red's reputation in the mud, and soon followed with a mass amount of anonymous reports from CD Projekt Red's developers, each speaking out about the terrible conditions and mismanagement that they were put through during the development cycle of the game, and that the under-optimized and buggy mess of the game is the best they could get it to for a plethora of reasons. From being one of the most beloved studios with the biggest releases of the year to one of the most despised studios almost overnight. The studio put out an apology and got on to fixing their game in hopes to pick up the disheveled pieces of their reputation. And it would seem that this would be the continued view of the studio until something strange happened. Almost 2 years after the scathing hate train had fallen off, and a slew of updates leaving the game in a somewhat playable state, they put out a TV show tied to the world of Cyberpunk 2077, a Netflix original that completely turned around the public's perception and seemingly erased the memory of anyone who bought the game on launch. And just as fans hated CD Projekt Red overnight, they now loved them in a weird turnaround. Come a year later and they rolled out 2.0, an update promising to fix many issues and fulfilling many features the public had asked for since day one, as well as a DLC as the cherry on top to end development of the game. So where does it all stand? If I picked up the game right now, what will I encounter exactly 3 years after its launch? And does CD Projekt Red deserve the praise for a great game and their labor of love? Or do they still deserve to be hung from the rafters as an evil corporation? I'm Sin, and this is the final Cyberpunk review. Starting the game either on launch or in modern day, you face the same dilemma as many other RPGs. Where to start, and how to spec your character. Even going so far to decide their dick size. And immediately, you face one of the biggest gripes about the game. That your first choice, Nomad, Street, or Corpo, doesn't matter or change the game in any impactful way. Outside of a few quirky dialogue options that vary in response, they don't actually amount to anything impactful, meaningful, or change how the rest of the game plays out. Any beginning you choose doesn't impact the gameplay or have any actual RPG elements tied to your choice. And immediately, a rift is built as you tear away my identity as a player from me. And no matter which option you choose, playing the exact same cutscene of your growing bond with your new best friend, Jackie, a character you just met and had no choice in calling your best friend. A less than stellar start for a game coming from a developer hot off one of the best RPGs of the past decade. Even without the merit of choice, there's one consistent note that hits about Cyberpunk, and that's the characters and their performances that each actor puts on. It's amazing. Jackie becomes your first taste of this. Jason Hightower puts on a great performance as your charming Latino best friend. Keanu Reeves, being announced as having a part in the game, originally had a huge asterisk tied to it for the public, with most people expecting him to play a small role or part in the larger story, and just to be used to build the hype of the game. But in the actual game, Keanu Reeves plays one of the most important characters, directly tied to the player at all times, and showing up in almost every single sequence and cutscene, be it a major plot point or a pointless side quest. And this remains true for almost every character in the game. Evelyn, Judy, Dexter, Panam, Lizzie, Misty, Oda, Placide, Victor. You get the point. After meeting with the priorly mentioned Dexter Deshawn, you set out with Jackie to pull off your biggest job to date, robbing Arasaka, a corporation that will serve as the major party of conflict for the rest of the game. And upon completing the heist and stealing the chip you came after, the whole job goes sour, with the CEO of Arasaka being killed by his son before your eyes. You being framed for the murder. Jackie, your new best friend, dies and getting cursed with an engram of Johnny Silverhand and a sick twist of your reward, with the engram in your head both trying to kill you and juxtaposing the come up and success you've just been shown a minute ago, and in filling the core theme of the game. Nothing good happens in Night City. The rest of the game is spent mission to mission in the open world of Night City, with side missions plenty and 3 dividing paths in the main storyline, each following a set of characters: Panam, Takamura, and Rogue. Panam is a member of the Aldecaldos, a nomad group on the edge of Night City, a pact that roams the countryside, full to the brim with outcast and ex-military vets, sticking with family over anything. These missions give light as you explore your purpose outside of the shadow of Johnny Silverhand or Arasaka. While Takamura, who once was the bodyguard of Arasaka's CEO, but with his death betrayed and left without sense, with the common interest of the player to get back at Arasaka, working to prove your innocence, his rightful position in the company, and to avenge his master. And finally, Rogue, Johnny Silverhand's ex, seeking to help Johnny finally get his final blaze of glory and revenge on Arasaka, each character lining up with the initial choice given to the player, all to instill the 3 layers of Night City to the player. The moment-to-moment gameplay between the cutscenes is really good and quite commendable. Your perks and skills allow a plethora of playstyles suitable for each player. I personally tried to play the entire game like it was Splinter Cell, until something inevitably went awry, and I just shot my way through the level. But you can really do whatever you want with each level. There are a few missions where you're so linearly driven to do it one way. You can hack everything if you want, you can play pacifist, you can just shoot everything that fucking moves. It truly is great, and the individual levels manage to edge out games like Red Dead 2 or GTA 5 in its replayability and opportunities that it creates. It's just too fucking bad. The amazing performance and good gameplay is completely spoiled by the lack of a... The one thing you can't fix, no matter the amount of updates you pump into it, is the story. Through and through, the story, motivations, and themes behind the entire game are flawed beyond a reasonable doubt. The lack of motivation behind the choices you make is derived all the way from the beginning of the game. failing continuously to both paint Johnny Silverhand as a reasonable or likable character and Arasaka as an evil corporation. So let's walk this back, all the way from the top. In the beginning, as previously mentioned, you get 3 choices, one of which is to be a corpo, working for Arasaka. And not only do you get to see the corporate warfare that goes on at the top level of this world, but you get dropped to rock bottom soon after. But with this all happening only 5 minutes into the game, it fails to leave any meaningful sense or impact on me as a player. I don't feel in tune or invested in this world yet, so doing anything in the first 5 minutes leaves me feeling the same as when I put myself in this world, seeing as I have yet to put myself in the protagonist's shoes. And no matter which start you choose, the same thing is reverberated with Jackie, playing a cutscene of you becoming best friends, rather than allowing himself to imprint upon me through levels or experiences, telling me I'm his best friend, and we made our way from the bottom to the top, doesn't have the same impact as allowing me to befriend him, or give the same sense to me working my way up the ladder of the streets, drawing a rift and feeling between me and the protagonist. I don't feel like V, and as an introduction, this fails to get me invested in the problems we are about to incur, because I didn't struggle from the bottom. I don't understand the emotional importance of the job robbing Arasaka Tower, or how big of a deal it is. Not only because I don't understand where we came from, but I have no sense in the size of threat our opponent imposes upon us and the rest of Night City. There's been no pretense or context given beforehand outside the one of 3 starts you can choose, which even that failed to really give me a meaningful sense or impact lasting enough to provide context and importance in the narrative. And thus, when shit goes south, I don't honestly care about Jackie's death or the failure of the mission. There's no sense of loss because it's been an hour. I've done 2 missions and I didn't gain anything to lose. The same problem occurs with Johnny Silverhand. You're shown 2 flashbacks as shared memories of Johnny. The first, chronologically, is Johnny being a rock star, then immediately topping it off with being an asshole to his girlfriend, Alt Cunningham, who is then kidnapped by Arasaka. The motivation for this, Johnny believes to be to get back at him for his public outcry against the company. In his rather narcissistic worldview, this makes sense, until you get the world-shattering reality that she developed Soul Killer, a system that traps one's mind into an engram, the same program Johnny would eventually fall victim to. But we'll get back to that part. Johnny rushes into Arasaka Tower and shoots the place up, only to find what he believes to be his dead girlfriend. He then leaves the city for 10 years, before being reached out to by Militech, a rival corporation to that of Arasaka, and they join up on a mission to nuke Arasaka Tower in a feat of revenge for his girlfriend, but being captured after the nuke goes off. And in a similar twist of fate as the protagonist, forever trapped by Soul Killer, the same program developed by his girlfriend that he was fighting to avenge in a feat of irony. This is great, except for a lot. Glazing past the plot holes of how a rock star can not once, but twice, shoot his way through Arasaka Tower. The fact he went missing for 10 years, not to be hunted by an international company that has insane power, or the fact that after despising corporations, works with the Militech even though they are equivalent in size and wrongdoing in the world to Arasaka. But beyond that, Johnny Silverhand not only does not give his original motivation to why he hated Arasaka before Alt got kidnapped, but he also never spends any meaningful time throughout the game being vulnerable and speaking personally on any of his feelings on the corporations, the corporate wars before all these events unfold, or his regrets and griefs from his final acts of life, never speaking on the passing of Alt in a meaningful way, or a reflection of guilt for nuking Night City. And he ended up killing thousands of innocent people. We never once get to see a drop of regret or further exposition on his feelings about the matter. The whole game, he stays the same pompous, narcissistic asshole rockstar who's so full of his own shitty worldview without giving you a merit of perspective behind why he cares at all. The only sense of regret he has through the entire game is during Rogue's missions, where he admits to regretting treating his friends like trash and betraying their trust. But this is completely undone when you realize he did the exact same thing to you literally a mission ago at the start of Rogue's questline, where he literally betrays your trust and treats everyone like shit. So it's hard to believe in this heart-to-heart that he has a huge change of character in the last 5 fucking minutes. If you compare this to games of similar fashion, like Grand Theft Auto 5, the problematic storytelling becomes so much more apparent. Looking at GTA 5's opening, the bank heist serves only as a backstory, an explanation to what Michael and Trevor were doing long before the story of modern day, giving context behind the characters. In the opening, you don't get to know them as characters, nor does this serve as the primary conflict or motivation throughout the game. The primary protagonist actually has no driving factors from this heist. It can be seen as a more of a prelude rather than actual introduction. Removing it from the game would change nothing about the world that isn't filled in later through dialogue and the relationships and developments as characters. While in Cyberpunk, Jackie's death is a key motivator for us as a character. Johnny's entire personality hinges on his hate for Arasaka and the events of the past, and the heist is the direct cause of everything that follows in the game. It's not a prelude in this story. If we take it all the way back to elementary school, we can graph this all in a plot pyramid. In GTA 5, the bank heist is the earliest point on the plot pyramid. You only get to the start of the rising action when the characters finally all meet, after Michael and Franklin's first bank heist together, with Trevor serving as one of the many complications in the rising action. While in Cyberpunk, the Arasaka heist is the beginning of the rising action. The problematic introductions, reasonings, and character development is synonymous with so many of the game's characters. Dexter Deshawn isn't shown or built up to be an important or dangerous figure. Rather, it's told to us, failing to express how important this job is to our characters, or how dangerous it could be before we go into it. Takamura is introduced after being betrayed, but I failed to care about the betrayal since he was trying to kill me literally 30 seconds ago. And there's not enough time between the two of you over the few short missions you have together to actually develop as a partnership, with almost every mission with Takamura being spent alone rather than together as a duo. Judy and Evelyn actually have great introductions and character growth, but after the first chapter of the game comes to a close and Evelyn dies, Judy is non-existent in the main story. The only character with a proper introduction, expositioning, reasoning, and growth as a partner is Panam. But with so much of this game hinging on the past, not having that prelude or a moment during the rising action to speak from a more personal and driving perspective from most of the driving characters gives a half-assed final product that doesn't go deeper than surface level. And this all comes to a height with an overwhelming lack of motivation or sense of purpose and choice when it comes to the because the endings follow the same parties you spend your time around, Arasaka, Johnny Silverhand, or Panam, the motivation behind each character should be important and force the player to decide their own moral choice on how they want the game to end. And outside of Panam, there's not really a merit or reason to side with either of the other two, with Arasaka failing to be painted as overly evil, with no major motivation from the player in the introduction, and no exposition from Johnny to help give some degree of impact. And Arasaka fails to give any benefit to siding with them, while Johnny isn't seen as deeper than an annoying rock star. with no real bond to be built from this lack of meaningful character growth, or as less than shallow exposition throughout the story. So, let's break down all 3 endings. What happens in each one, and what is the best possible choice you can make. Starting with the one that feels most sensible, in Panam's ending, you step out of the shadow of Night City and find aid in the Aldecaldos, connecting with Alt and coming up with a plan to raid Arasaka Tower for the final time. Get to the basement, patch Alt in, and allow her to separate you from the engram, and Johnny with it. This ending completely dispels the issues with Johnny and Arasaka's lack of driving motivation, but does so by shedding a lot of the narrative built up until this point, further removing the importance of the other 2 conflicting parties and bipartisan so many acts of this game, making a lot of it feel like a waste of my time if it doesn't impact the penultimate climax of the story, like working so hard to get a hold of Hanako being pointless, or working to prove Takamura and V's innocence. Not to say that the romantic relationship of Panam is bad. It's the most solid relationship built throughout the entire game, seeing the growth of the relationship from the beginning and giving clear background on her as a character and the inner conflict she has as an Aldecaldos member, with you having a direct and large impact on her identity and growth throughout the game, as well as being tied with the other members of the group along the way, with this relationship climaxing as you get brought as a member into the family, and making the deaths of the Aldecaldos members more impactful in the raid. You watch your newfound family sacrifice themselves for your newfound chance at life, and face off against Adam Smasher, the same person who defeated Johnny so long ago, who now kills the leader of your newfound family. After all that, you're told you have 6 months to live, and you have 2 choices. Live out your last few months, or give Johnny control. And if you choose to live on, you ride out of Night City with Panam to find hope at extending your life, with your death being implied off screen. And I hate this. Just riding off into the sunset without a final conclusion, it neither fulfills the loss of your newfound family members with a victory at the end, or instills the tragedy that befalls everyone in Night City as you should die. It's this overwhelmingly mediocre ending without a true sensible conclusion to be seen. It doesn't feel like I get to close the last chapter of the book, but more like you ripped out the last few pages and asked me to imagine the rest. After all the work I've put in to get here, after being forced to make so many choices, losing so many members of my newfound family, I don't even get a conclusive ending. This becomes even worse when you realize Rogue's ending is a literal carbon copy of the raid on Arasaka Tower from Panam's ending. But instead of going with Panam and the Aldecaldos, instead you run in with Rogue and a mercenary she just hired. The same boss fight as Adam Smasher, Rogue's death, and the same choice at the end of all of it. But this time, it ends with you running Rogue's bar and becoming a mercenary, with again your death just being implied, leaving the same underwhelming feeling. Actually, the funny part of all this is siding with the villain in the shortest and what should be the worst choice gives you the best ending of the entire game. Again, entering Arasaka Tower, but not until freeing Hanako, with revealing that Johnny wasn't the only engram, but the CEO of Arasaka that was murdered, Saburo Arasaka's conscience, was copied down in an engram, with you, Hanako, and the engram of Saburo Arasaka holding a board meeting with the executives of Arasaka to prove your innocence and finally hold Yorinobu accountable for his actions. With everything going terribly awry, the board members being killed by guards sent from Yorinobu in an attempt to silence you and keep a hold on his company. Then, you run through the same raid as the 2 missions prior, but rather than going to the basement, you ascend to the highest floor to confront Yorinobu. And in the end of it all, you realize he himself hated Arasaka, and after killing his father, he finally destroyed most of the company. His goal all along. Explaining why he kept the engram of Johnny, why he had killed his father, why he had started the gang opposing the corporate entities in his youth, why so much of the game comes together, with you just happening to fall in the middle of all of it, finally giving purpose and explanation to so much of the game world, but being so poorly explained in its dialogue during the fucking sequence. And after everything, you finally get your reward. But rather than jacking Alton, you get surgery and are taken care of by Arasaka, locked in one of their facilities. Day after day, ran through testing. You get to go through each new day as the news unfolds that in your actions, the hero of Night City, Yorinobu's conscience, was replaced with that of his father's, to rebuild Arasaka after his son's actions, all while you're locked away in this room. You're finally free from Johnny, but at what cost? You aren't even actually free. And as you go absolutely crazy in this room, day after day, the same test over and over, you get to experience being entrapped, imprisoned, and tested on by Arasaka, with no merit of empathy or care. And for the first time in the entire game, you get a negative first-hand experience with Arasaka, cementing itself as a heartless corporation, never explaining what they're testing for. Is it for your benefit? Their benefit? Halfway through, I started to question if the sequence was even fucking real. And after having a full-on mental breakdown and trashing your room, you finally get your choice. You have 6 months to live, but you have a different set of options this time. There's no option to help Silverhand. And after seeing the true colors of Arasaka for the first time, you can leave and die on your own terms, or you can sign a contract and be forever put into Arasaka's database. The same as Johnny was, the same as Saburo, but you become their property. Becoming Arasaka's property is the only ending that feels like it has an actual conclusion. Like, I actually get to close the book. This ending isn't perfect. As with all the endings, being told the board knew of your innocence the entire time is nothing short of demeaning, making every mission you've done with Takamura feel empty after learning this. And learning Johnny's not the only engram feels like they handed you a no-shit sandwich. Of course, the most important people in the company would have copies, but it destroys the important one-of-a-kind image repeated to you about the engram throughout the entire game, making the original heist feel less valuable. Jackie's death, and thus every sequence that follows, it paints how truly small you are in Arasaka's eyes, but it devalues so much of the game up to this point, finally giving you some understanding behind how big and evil Arasaka are in this ending. But it's just too little, too late, and still isn't clear or whole enough in the dialogue given to you. It's a love-hate relationship that feels like a true tragedy. It's not perfect, but it's definitely the best ending of them all. Or it was. It was the best ending until the Phantom Liberty DLC not only fixes everything I've complained about up until this point, but conclusively gives you the best ending in the entire game. Just after the Voodoo Boys, you get a call that directs you to Dogtown, a sect of Night City ruled by Kurt Hansen and his militia. It's a cut of Night City that is lawless. No outside help of police or any official governing bodies. It's the true chaos of a lawless dystopia, rather than the clean streets and neon lights of Night City. And in the beginning of the DLC, they simultaneously throw away everything you've dealt with thus far and enrich the world well beyond what the main game does. Completely forgoing all parties that you can choose to side with in the main game, Arasaka is not an important party of conflict in Dogtown. Neither is Pan Am or Rogue. Johnny only serves as a monologue of sorts to enrich the story in Dogtown and to give the protagonist character an outside perspective of thought and relatability. The whole DLC starts with you needing to aid in saving the president. Throughout this long introduction sequence to Dogtown, you also get to meet two primary players in the story, the president and Songbird. After promptly saving the president, you cross complications in which Songbird is no longer responding to your calls. Thus, you get introduced to the two other primary characters you will be working alongside, Solomon and Alex. And upon meeting Alex, you get the full context behind the relationship of all the characters introduced thus far, with Songbird, Solomon, and Alex having served together during the corporate wars. And for the first time in the game, you get a personal perspective into the past, both from the main characters, but also from Johnny Silverhand, with each character having not this direct good guy or bad guy image like it's handed to you in the main game, but it's such a complex, diverse plot full of gray, with so many characters having betrayed each other, or working with the enemy, or the good guy actually being pretty terrible, from cover stories, backstabbing, and ulterior motives. You get to question everyone's true reasonings and character, and you get to spend time with each character, hearing each person's perspective and what they present to you as their truth, giving so much more weight behind the choices given. Even the president, who you're supposed to be saving and doesn't exist as a character outside the introduction, still plays a huge part in the backstories of each character, and gets her full picture painted by others' dialogue. You even get some personal time with the antagonist of the story, Kurt, and each character has something to say about Kurt. Even though he's not a character you can side with, his role in this story becomes so much more weighted when you fully understand his beliefs and reasoning. And all this to climax at not some one-note boss fight like Adam Smasher, but the entire game flips itself on its head and removes all your power as it becomes a horror game akin to that of Resident Evil, Fear, and playing out like Alien Isolation, and giving you a conclusion that finally delivers on an amazing story. They fixed everything I wanted, gave a much more interesting setting, characters, and plot in Dogtown. But the conversation of still recommending this game becomes so much more complex when you talk about how the main game still isn't. Okay, as I spoke on before, the game originally released in such a terrible, disheveled, buggy mess. And there's been this huge run of people speaking on how they fixed the main game and how it's perfect now. And that's just not true. Even after the 2.0 release, it's still buggy. Yes, it's in a playable state on PC and console, but it doesn't change the fact that so much of the game is still a buggy mess. And there still are a number of game-breaking bugs. From the excusable repeat NPCs, cars glitching out in the open world, to the game's lighting just breaking. But as that's kind of excusable, less so are the game-breaking bugs that can be found in linear main story missions. My favorite of these is the Sasquatch boss fight during the Voodoo Boys levels, where Matilda can slam you in the ground, and in doing so near any geometry can just get you permanently stuck in said geometry. And after this happening multiple times to me, her AI just broke. It's game breaking. It's in a linear controlled sequence. It's been 3 years and a full 2.0 update later, and this stuff still persists. It's inexcusable on a quality control level. The police system, though better than on release, still feels less than good. It's not challenging to get away from the police. I never once through my playthrough had any real conflict with the police unless I specifically seeked it out, which makes them feel much less real or like they have any actual threat in the game world. The driving and shooting have both improved, but it's not a night and day difference compared to when I first played the game almost 2 years ago. It's minimal and it's difference at best. And though the cars aren't bad, they still underdeliver compared to that of older gen games like GTA 5 and are more comparable to games like Watch Dogs. The driving and shooting seems cool as an addition on paper, but when you realize all the driving combat sequences were never updated to utilize this, it feels like an unnecessary tacked on feature that isn't necessary. When 2.0 released, you saw this huge outcry of people returning and being so amazed at the state of the game. You got all these comparison videos highlighting the updated features, but most of the updates don't have any actual effect on the gameplay. The water physics and swimming being added don't change the game at all. In fact, there's almost no reason to spend any time swimming or in the water The only reason this seems to have been added is for one mission in the DLC. The car decals don't really change anything. The climbing of ladders does not dramatically change my gameplay or experience. I would much rather have them spend time refining the environments in the world, or optimizing the game more, and fixing the game-breaking bugs that still persist. Don't add new shit. Fix what you already have. So, after all of this, it's finally time to give the game a... The main game of Cyberpunk is still a lackluster experience no matter what anyone says. As great as the moment-to-moment gameplay is, the overarching narrative and drive of the plot fails to meet expectations, and thus makes the smaller moments feel a lot less important or impactful, and has me as a player feeling rather disassociated in a genre that's built on world building and decision making. It feels like CD Projekt Red is not only behind titans of the industry like Rockstar with GTA and Red Dead, but even their own past titles. It amounts to something closer to Watch Dogs or Saints Row in its final state, earning about a gracious 3 out of 5. The DLC, however, is a very strong story and overall experience, fixing everything I complained about and giving me all that I could ask for. It feels like the standalone story of the DLC can more than stand on its own 2 feet, and not only crushes the main game story, but pushes itself into talking spaces with companies like Rockstar. It sucks that to get this experience, no matter how you break it down, will cost you $90. Either buying the Ultimate Edition or the main game, then the DLC. Both ways, it costs $90. Do I think the DLC is worth $30? Yes. But if you don't already own the game, even if it's a 5 out of 5 DLC, it's still hard to recommend this experience due to the biggest plot hole in the entire game. And it's not actually in the game, but rather what occurred outside the game. Because at the end of the day, Cyberpunk is a game about being a punk and rebelling against the corporations and controlling powers, with the Arasaka ending seemingly being the bad ending, but yet the company behind telling the story of rebellion and freedom themselves are an evil corporation. After the release of Cyberpunk, a slew of developers and staff members all came out anonymously to speak on the reason why the game came out in such poor condition, and the terrible environment that CD Projekt Red has culminated in their studios. Not asked, but expected as employees to work 6 days a week, 16-hour days, for almost 2 fucking years. That's about 5,000 work hours in a year, doubling that of a normal 40-hour work week, with the majority of the game being developed in only the last 2 years of the development cycle, and they're currently worth $3 billion. They're the same size as companies like Ubisoft. Money wasn't an object when it came to delaying the game. It comes down to 2 real things. 1, the fans, and 2, the shareholders. CD Projekt Red is a publicly traded company, meaning their shareholders and the public are the driving motivators behind everything they do. And having built up all this hype the year prior to release, to just throw it away would have been a huge missed opportunity. As well as the few times they put a short delay on the project, apparently CD Projekt Red got death threats from unhappy fans. A lot of this derives from the hype and presence the studio built up before the game was actually ready. Why did they do that? It's unclear, and we will likely never fully know. But does that excuse the way they treat their employees? No. No, it does not. Cyberpunk, at the end of this all, is an average experience, and it's extremely hard to actually recommend it. Just playing the base game is lackluster at best. The DLC is fantastic, but increases the price tag to a hefty $90. And this all feels so shit in the end because of who you're handing that over to. And no amount of press details, Netflix shows, or documentaries is going to make me dive into the hype and put this game in conversation with all the greats. After all, the hype train is what derailed the entire game's shelf life. And I feel like all the criticism and hate is honestly deserved. Even if they spent 3 years working on it after launch, all in all, as much as people are going to hate me to say it, this game, once you take in the entire picture at the end of its lifespan, both in the game and in the real world, it gets a strong 2 out of 5.
Hey, thanks so much for watching the video. If you liked the video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. Currently I'm working on a video for the new year, and I wanted to include a Q&A section. If you have any questions, put them down below in the comment section. Other than that, I'll see you the next time. Bye-bye.